Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to Risking It All with me, Jake Bernardes. It's good morning from me. I'm in LA for work this week, so it's sunny-ish, cloudy outside. I'm looking forward to a fascinating conversation. My guest today is Rick Doten, who's a VP of InfoSec at Centene, who are a ginormous healthcare company, for anyone who doesn't know who they are. And this sparked from, I actually watched a presentation he gave at the Cyber Defense Awards in Orlando last year on neurodiversity, on what it means, on how to harness it, on how to benefit from people's different ways of thinking. I think this could be an absolutely fascinating conversation. So I'm not going to waste any time with my ramblings. Let's get Rick on and talk to him. Rick, hello. Thank you for joining me.
Hello, Jake. Great to see you. It is actually noon here on the East Coast. I'm based in Charlotte, and I'm excited to have this conversation today.
Thanks, man. So I start the same way every time. Introduce yourself, please. And then I'd like to know your hero, your hobby, and the biggest risk you ever took in life.
Yeah, those are good ones. So my name is Rick Doten. I work for Centene Corporation. I'm the health plan CISO and also do a lot of other things internally. I talk to lots of vendors and startups, and on the advisory board of a number of startups and on boards of directors. So I'm very integrated in the industry. And here in Charlotte, I am the social coordinator for my CISO community, and it can manage the calendar for all my friends and everything like that. I'm a very social person, and I'm very chatty for someone in my role. So my hobbies are really just, learning and helping people in, learning about new things. And, like I said, I talk to more startups than anybody, and did a keynote yesterday morning about, AI and agentic AI and automated remediation. And then I'm also a yoga teacher. I teach corporate yoga for my health plan. For a few years, like twice a month, would get on Zoom and have my people working for me to kind of follow along, a little breathing, open up the shoulders, open up the hip flexors, and I like just doing stuff. So my hero is kind of a tough one. I guess I'd have to say, because it changes, right? But I would say, like, if you gave me a single answer, to be my mother, which seems kind of trite, but my mother is a very strong woman who influenced me a lot. She was a military officer's wife growing up, and when I was growing up in the 70s. And during that time, in her social obligations and being a mother, got a degree in psychology, and then went on to get advanced degrees in counseling psychology for substance abuse. And she ran substance abuse treatment facilities for decades. And this was before it was really known. It was, back in the 70s and early 80s, it was, with AA, and you're kind of off on your own. No one thought it as a mental thing. Substance abuse disorder was not really considered a thing. So, she was really instrumental in that. And I helped and then when I graduated from college, I did some training for her residents on assertiveness training, stress management, nutrition for substance abuse recovery, which is where I really cut my teeth in being a presenter. I have for 2 years some 22-year-old punk talking to an apathetic audience of 60 people who don't want to listen to what I have to say. You get really, really good at being able to manage an audience. And so that's why I have all my career been the face person. And the risk is a tough one for me, because I've, unfortunately, like, have been having to be very risk averse, and in my life, and taking care of my family. And so I guess it's just that I am up for anything. And as I'll talk about when we talk about neurodiversity, like, I'm, happy to fail quickly, because failure is a path to success. It's like, you haven't failed enough. I'm a rock climber, another hobby of mine, indoors, pulling on plastic, as we call it. And one of the stories that are kind of will be related to something I talk later on is that, 20 years ago, I remember, like, in the bouldering area, and somebody is like, "Hey, can you give me some bait on this route?" And I said, "How many times have you tried it?" And they said, "Oh, like 4 or 5. I'm like, "Oh, when you get to 20 and you still can't do it, come look for me." Because by the time they got to 15 or 16, they figured it out. I'm like, you haven't failed enough. And just changing that mindset about, I'm not expected to do it right the first time. I need to do trial and error and fail until I get to it. And some people have a hard time with that.
That's fascinating. Interesting. Thank you. Let's talk neurodiversity, because this is a topic which I knew very little about until last year, and then have since become very interested and learned as much as I can possibly about. Tell us a bit about what it is, why you are interested in it, and try and educate the audience a little bit, and then I'll interject and interrupt with questions as I have.
Yep. Look forward to that. So neurodiversity is kind of this umbrella term for a lot of different conditions. So I don't want to say disorders, because I don't want to put a name, because the ironic thing is that it is the only, and I don't even say mental health disorder, but that has positives to it, right? If you have depression, if you have anxiety, if you have bipolar, if you have borderline, if you have histrionic, if you have all these things, they're all negative downsides to it, right? But neurodiversity, which is this broad umbrella of things from autism to ADHD to dyslexia to dyspraxia, dyscalculia. Dyspraxia is like your space and time. We have 11 senses and knowing where my body is in time. If you bump into things a lot, if you drop things a lot, if you're clumsy, if you find you have a bunch of bruises, it's because you don't where your body is not aware where it is in space properly. Dyscalculia is like dyslexia, but with numbers. If you say, I don't have the math gene, that's probably a dyspraxia. It's not anything. That's not that you're not intelligent, because I have never met a neurodiverse person who wasn't like really intelligent and really creative. That's kind of like one of the indicating things. So there are positives to it, and that's an important thing. There's also a lot of
my first question, Rick. First question. You said I've never met a neurodiverse person who wasn't. Do you think everyone is neurodiverse? No. I wonder if everyone sits somewhere on this. So talk to me. Often people say that everyone's on the spectrum somewhere. I've heard that saying a lot of times. So talk to me about that comment. And by the way, if anyone else has got any questions, please fire them in, and I'll interrupt.
Yeah. So no. I would say that the evolution is an important thing. Yes, I mean, we can trace it back for tens of thousands of years. And if you look at, the way that we do pattern matching and system understanding and be able to do predictions and be able to understand relations of things, it is what it made society improve. So someone tens of thousands of years ago, hey, the sun goes in this pattern, the stars are in this pattern, the animals move in this pattern. If we plant here, we'll have better things doing. Hey, when these two things come together, they taste good. Or if these two things work together, they can be very effective. And so neurodiverse people have made society improve. If you go back into history and look at every single inventor, every single artist, every single music virtuoso, congratulations, they're all neurodiverse, because it's that creative thing about trying to find something that doesn't exist. And so it's the ability of having original thought and original ideas, which is what creativity is, right? It's a response to limitations.
So we're going Socrates, Newton, Da Vinci, anyone Mozart, really who's had an impact on
everybody, Michelangelo, all of them, have been that way. So you say, is everybody? And I say no, because I would say, if you look at the statistics, it's more like, 4 to 6% are ADHD and 3 to 4% in the US are autistic. I think that I also personally believe that those are two sides of the same coin. That as I've gone through clinical training to understand more about this, to be an autism and ADHD coach, I, as an outsider, am looking at, the clinical industry really doesn't understand this that well. We're figuring it out. And a lot of it's catered to, particularly in the United States, our healthcare industry. We need to have a diagnosis. So you are oppositional defiance disorder, you are, ADHD, you are this thing, because we need a category to be able to bill for it. But I think it's really two sides of the same coin. And I'll talk about executive functions in a minute, and that's where it all kind of boils down. And so my opinion, and some of my peers in the industry, think it's more like 20% that are the everybody. But ironically, we all hang together. We are attracted to each other because we are not judgmental of each other, and we all can be our weirdos and our nerd selves without any, feeling bad about it. And so when I first looked into this like 2.5 years ago, and I'm watching on TikTok, like neuroscientists talk about this, and ADHD and autism influencers talk about it, I'm like, I don't know anyone who's not this way. What are you talking about? And then I started looking around at who is not this way. And I challenge you to do that. Like while you're out there in LA, is like kind of look around as you're at a restaurant, you're at a grocery store, you're walking on the street, like, okay, you're not this way. You're not this way. So people who are happy to follow a trend, not like necessarily have hobbies, not really like, what books am I interested in, but I'll just follow what the New York Times, says, what's the, all these different things. And and they're not the ones who are setting the trends, and there are a lot of people who, most of the majority of the population are that way. So I think that it is just a certain aspect of it. So a question about, like, being a leader is autistic. I'm autistic and I'm on ADHD. And so what flavor you get based on what executive functions you are good at or not as good at. And but I want to, before I talk about executive function, I want to talk about the two main things about approaches to solving problems. So on the one side, you have people who are multi-threaded. And so I can do multiple things at once, and I'm happy to keep track of them, and I'm failing quickly, right? It's like I got to fail quickly, like the story I said. I also will run forward with little information. I'm like, hey, we need to do this. Okay, great. And I start running forward because I'm going to figure it out as I go. And that's fine. And then if you look on the other side, it's people who are single-threaded. And so single-threaded people are meticulous with every step, afraid to fail, and they won't take that first step unless they've figured out every single step along the way before I take that first step. And that's fine. I just want to know what I'm working with. The people on the left-hand side are great. I ran ethical hacking teams from the late 90s to late 2000 and in incident response teams, et cetera. And every single one of us is this way because you have to be multi-threaded to do that, But on the other side, I had forensics people and I had project managers, and they're single-threaded, multi-threaded or single-threaded. Some people refer to think fast, think slow, system one, system two thinking, it's all kind of the same thing. So so that is kind of fundamental, and some people can ease back and forth between them depending on the circumstance. I absolutely will run forward little information, figure it out. Other people in my life are like, wait, what are you doing? We need to figure out the plan. We have to have a plan first. What do we need to do? So then talking, the real nuance to it is executive function. So your prefrontal cortex, which is the first part of your brain, your brain develops from the back to the front. The back is where the knowledge is. That's where your memories are. That's where you do all the things. The front of the brain is the action part, right? And you probably heard the thing, your brain's not fully formed till you're 25. That's the prefrontal cortex. That runs the executive functions. Your executive functions are 7 to 11, depending on who you ask, things, and I say they can be broken up into one thing. Like I separate emotional regulation and impulse control. Some people combine them, right? So emotional regulation, like how well you respond to emotional things. Are you an emotional reactor or are you not? Impulse control. Are you one who is easily addicted to things, easily fall to impulses? These are two executive functions. And I kind of like to use the analogy of like setting up a Dungeons and Dragons character, right? And I'm rolling, if I have a warrior, I'm rolling for strength, rolling for agility, rolling for charisma. And I hope I get good rolls for certain things because I know what I'm doing with this character. In life, you don't know. You just kind of, you're born and you've rolled for all these things and you don't know what that number is until you're 25. And there are other things throughout your growth that could affect that number up or down, childhood trauma or support or other kinds of things. And so that's why, and it really, I wish I knew this, when my sons, who are both in their late 20s now, were younger, because it really would have helped in parenting. That's like, I cannot expect a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old child to understand theory of mind, to have emotional regulation, to be able to have impulse control, to be able to have planning and organization, to have task activation, to be able to have time management. These are all executive functions that they don't have fully developed. And they may not have them when they're in their 20s, or they may roll really high. I rolled really high for time management and task switching. Like I'm literally working on a white paper. I'm going to do this talk with you, and then I'm going to go do something else. And I don't need to have this buffer in between to get in a mindset. Go ahead.
Here's a question for you that I think is interesting. Or a question and a comment. So Michael commented that he has multiple sclerosis and he has mental health problems that are caused different to autism. I think that's interesting as well, how people take advantage of whatever position they're in, whatever condition they've got, and can leverage the things that are dormant underneath that, right? I think that often I've met people who have physical or mental disabilities, and actually it's led to them actually focusing and enhancing and being incredibly effective in different parts of their brain, different capabilities, different capacities. So I think the human has this natural ability to adapt if we want to.
Yep.
I think that's comment one to Michael's point. The comment two, you talked about rolling the dice, right? And Dungeons and Dragons characters. Here's my question. If you roll a 10 when you're born in whatever, right, time management, or you roll a 2, do you think that's changeable, or do you think that's inherent? Like, do you think you can develop those, or are those just inside of, is that role final and that's who you are as a human being?
So My opinion is that it is changeable to a little bit up until it's locked in when you're in your mid 20s. But what
My mid
you can
20s
do
because your
is
front and your brain is fully
accommodate,
developed.
because as you're fully developed, right?
Yeah.
But you can accommodate. So perfect example is someone may have poor emotional regulation, but rolled really high on planning and organization. So they are single threaded and they were like plan everything so that there's nothing to chance to fall through so that they don't have an emotional breakdown. And so I will control, like I have poor, if someone has poor task initiation, then they can accommodate that with planning or with other tips or apps or things, or even buddy system, to be able to have someone like be their executive function to help them get started, or I'll sit with you to start. So the name of the game is accommodating. It's like, I know I am deficient in something, but I can accommodate with something that I rolled high on. And that's like, and it's similar to, well, not similar. Another thing we did is we developed masking, right? We found that in being neurodiverse that, it may not be comfortable with other people. Like, you're too loud, you're too quiet, you're too social, you're not social enough. Why don't you go outside? Why don't you sit still? Why don't you do all these things? We have all of these things told us because we're not like what normal is. Who defined that anyway? I didn't see that book. And so we decided, well, fine, people don't like it when I'm spastic and I talk fast and I'm rambling on things. So I'm going to start adjusting my behavior when I'm around people to be better accepted. And thing about, women and girls do this really, really well because their society, unfortunately, is kind of like forced it upon them to act a certain way to be accepted. And then you have neurodiversity on top of that. And then by the time you get to your 20s, like, you're exhausted because it takes a lot of energy to do that. And you wonder at the end of the day why you don't have any energy left, is because you've been trying to like use all this energy to mask and be something that you're not, which is why it's so important to find your community that accepts you, which is why most of our friends are this way. Because I can nerd out and I can talk about something. I can have an opinion about Spider-Man and someone's like, yeah, whatever, dude. Let me tell you about this. And so we were talking at each other. And it's funny, my sons are the same way. And we just talk in sharing information. It was like, hey, I did this thing and I want to tell you this. Cool. I did this thing. I'm telling you this. Cool. And then we walk away. Where like my wife wants to engage in a conversation and she's like, hey, well, ask me how I'm doing. And it has to be, it's like, we don't care. Like, my son comes down and he goes around and my wife's like, aren't you going to say hi to him? Like, no, he sees me. I see him. We acknowledge each other. If I had something to tell him, I tell him. We get it. It's also a guy thing. But anyway, so that's the important thing, is like finding your community of weirdos that is completely accepting of you.
Do you think everyone in cyber is?
Yeah. I think that it's one thing that draws us to it, because one of the interesting things is that, we'll talk about task activation and motivation, right? Everyone procrastinates. It's like a fundamental thing of ADHD, but there's a reason for that. And the reason is because when we think about time management and we think about urgency, it's like there's now and there's not now. And so it's like, is that paper due today? All right, it's not today. I don't have to focus on it until it gets to be now. And then the urgency kicks up, right? And so what motivates, and this is another thing as a parent, I wish I knew earlier, is like the basic things don't motivate ADHD people. It's not, it's important, I'll give you a cookie, a reward, or there'll be a consequence. It's like, whatever, I'll accept that. But what does is that it's our interest or our passion. It was like, ooh, I'm really interested in this. I'm going to do this. So how do I make it interesting to them? What's their currency? It could be that it's novel. It could be that it's urgent, like I said before, to do it, or that it is a challenge, right? I was talking about this topic to my son, and I said, yeah, remember when you were a kid? It's like, and I would say, hey, you got to mow the lawn or else you're not going to get your allowance. And he's like, yeah, I don't care. But if it was about to rain the next day and I knew it was going to be a pain in the butt mowing it 3 days from now, then that's an urgency. It's like, oh crap, I got to get out and mow before it rains. And is what I said. And he goes, or if you got a new lawnmower, then that'd be cool. It's like, oh, I want to play with the new lawnmower, the novelty. So think about how to like influence people based on that, and not like, this is important, you got to do it. It's like, hey, I have a challenge we need to solve, or we need to do this right away. So that's where the accommodations come in. And, you could have timers set up, you could have, sticky notes and things to try to figure out how it becomes, or gamify it, to be able to do things like that and to get that motivation.
Here's a question. So I had Megan from Accommodations on a few weeks ago, and we talked about neurodiversity, and we talked about the fact that actually you should benefit as a leader from people's superpower rather than being what society says in modern kind of DEI type world. Let's accept everyone. Let's deal with it. Let's get on with it. Let's move forward, right? But she's talking about how actually you can embrace the fact that people in this sphere on the spectrum have these abilities that can actually make them better at certain things than other people. What are your thoughts on that? How, if you're a leader and you identify, and so actually I've got several people who are significantly in this portion of the spectrum, whatever, on my team, like how do you leverage that to get more out of them, not just go,
absolutely. It's about accommodations, right? And that was the thing when I was running ethical hacking teams. We kept the lights off because sensory issues are very common. Cutting the tags off of your shirts, turning your socks upside down because the little rib on the top is on the bottom so you don't feel it, or the opposite, having compression. That's why weighted blankets are a thing. It provides comfort because it gives some stimulus. So understanding like what is the thing that makes them more comfortable to help them focus, to help them be successful. And if I need to keep them isolated and make it quiet, if I need to put them in a room with a lot of activity and have headphones and music playing so that they have their brain is occupied with other things so they could focus. That's why a lot of people go to coffee shops to work, because they can't work at home because it's too quiet and there's too many distractions, because all the distractions are in my head. I'm thinking of all the things to do. But if I'm in a coffee shop and there's music playing and there's always, my brain's distracted with, ooh, what's that? And then I can focus because I'm not thinking about all these other things.
You are less distracted by having more distractions sometimes.
Right. For some people, depends on how you roll. Right. And other people need, their headphones are noise canceling headphones and they need it to be quiet. They need to focus because they're easily distracted, because distractibility and focus are, again, two sides of the same coin, because the more focused you are, the harder it is to distract you, which then comes into task switching. So you have a kid who's watching TV or playing video games, like, hey, we need to go watch up for dinner. A meltdown happens because they're not ready to transition yet, because they're hyper focused. And you also have to like poke them like, hey, Jonathan, they're hyper focused on something. It's hard to distract. If you are not really, really focused, it's easy to distract. And it's like squirrel, and so that kind of element. And those are two things that when I talk about two sides of the same coin of autism and ADHD, is like autism, we kind of refer to special interests, right? Like I'm a yoga is a special interest to me. The neurodiversity is special interest to me. Cybersecurity is special interest. These are long-term things. It could be your hobby. Well, often when I kind of meet neurodiverse people, I'm like, what do you like to collect? Because I bet it's something. It's like, hey, what was interesting? What are you working on right now? And it's like, oh, I'm doing this thing because I'm, into plants, or I'm into hot peppers or pot sauce or whatever. And the time, so it's like, it's some special interest. It's a long-term thing that you're going to know everything about. And that becomes that superpower you said, or special or hyper focus is, I'm hyper focused on this thing to solve this problem because it's novel or it's a challenge, and I'm putting all my attention on it. So going back to your original statement is like, yeah, some people refer to it as a superpower. Some people take offense by that because like I'd rather be able to have better time management and not be late for everything and not be forgetful and be able to like solve problems and be able to see patterns and everything like that, and other people are like, yeah, I'm leaning into the fact that I'm really, really good at doing certain things, like identifying color, identifying patterns, on solving problems. I'm coming up with unique, novel ways of doing things. I'm be able to draw creatively, yes. And it's kind of discovering like, what are they really good at and what do they want to do? And that was the thing that I kind of instinctively learned years ago as a people leader, is those 5 elements that I said that motivates people. I'm like, what do you want to do? Because I want you to give you the time to do more of that. You do what I need you to do, and then you can do what you need to do.
It's interesting. So what you're saying is that you identify by almost process of elimination, or by kind of changing the environment circumstances, you identify what people react to and how they better focus, and also what skills you can enhance or leverage from those changes, and therefore work out how you get the best from people and then create the scenarios and environments within which they succeed. It's interesting because a lot of us, we look at kind of, I think the flip side is how people view the world sometimes is, okay, this is the environment we're in. What accommodations do I need to make that person able to survive in this environment? Your point is kind of the flip, which is how do I provide an environment that enables this person to thrive?
Right. And that's where the workforce and historically society makes things that are scalable and repeatable and consistent because that's easier to manage, right? And in a work environment, it's like, hey, everyone come in and work these hours during the day and wear this certain kind of outfit. And I need you to be like social and do these activities stuff. And that may make people very, very uncomfortable. But they can't like fight the system. It's like, well, actually, I'm a night person, not a morning person. And I like comfortable clothing. And I rather like work alone instead of around other people, and don't make me go do social events or don't make me speak in front of people. And instead of like, no, you need to be well-rounded and do these things. No, you don't. I have other people that can do that enjoy doing that. And so that's what I kind of learned early on is like, okay, Steve likes to work alone where it's quiet and without any disruption. I'll keep him in a room. He's the best in the world at the thing I want him to do. Why am I going to make him do stuff he's not good at and he's not comfortable with to make him, quote, well-rounded? He doesn't need to be that. But we as organizations sometimes like, oh, well, you need to learn these things and build these capabilities. It's like, you can be a specialist. And happily years ago, because it used to be when in the 80s, your career path was to go into management. So if you're the best technical person, they put you in management because that's the only career path. And they were awful managers for the reasons that we talked about, and awful people leaders because they weren't that. And then in the 2000s, we started having like, oh, principal engineers or architects or fellows or senior fellows or chief scientists. We can have like individual contributor that goes up this other path that's not management, and they can be an individual contributor at a very high level and support that. And that was a real important step in being able to say, hey, let's not put somebody in an uncomfortable position that they're inherently not good at and not going to succeed in just because that's how our societal structure has made the path.
It's interesting. One thing I think is interesting is when I was a kid, certainly people didn't really get diagnosed. There was the odd bit of ADHD and ADD, but limited. There was very few people who I ever met who were diagnosed as autistic. I think now we're much more common in catching it in schools and educational systems and in early stages of development. I think you see a lot of people also now in later life being diagnosed. I guess my question, I don't know if there's an answer to it. How do you know? You talk about lots of things. You did in Florida and you have done today, and I identify with lots of traits in ADD and autistic behaviors, but I've never been to a doctor. I've never asked, can you test me? Like, how do you know? And do you think it even matters? Like, is it?
No, it doesn't matter. It's like, it's all about accommodations. Now, if you feel like that you cannot function because you can't hyperfocus and you are addicted to caffeine or energy drinks or other drugs, there's a high comorbidity with substance abuse disorder with ADHD because you're self-medicating. And there's 45% comorbidity with substance abuse disorder for ADHD as opposed to 10% of the normal population. Oh, wow. Because you think that you need to calm down with alcohol. What you need is a stimulant. That's what all these ADHD medications. And so I've had people so I'll address two things. One, so many people are being diagnosed now because we now know what it looks like. Before, we were wrong in what we thought it looked like because all the studies were on middle-class American white boys. Right. And so it was not diversity. It presents differently in women. It may present differently in minorities or in the United States or in different, cultures and around the world. Because if you think about it, like in America, it's like we are expected to be very social. Right. It's like, when we go to Britain, we're the ones saying hi. You're like, why are you talking to me? We don't talk to people on the tram. It was like America, like, hey, what's up? Blah, 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 blah. That's like expected of us. So we're all kind of a little bit like outgoing. You go to Germany, nobody talks to anybody. Like if you were autistic in Germany, no one would know. Because you love structure, you love detail, you love these things, you love this stuff. But that's just the culture. But you go to Japan and you're ADHD, you'll never know. Because everyone is, hyper impulse control, addicted to gambling, has all these crazy things like lots of lights, lots of stimulation, lots of things going on at the same time. And it's just like culturally, it's like, it's fine. It's not noticeable, and so in other countries, just as two like very, very broad examples. So the bottom line is like, if it is, as my mother taught me years ago in substance abuse, it's when it starts affecting your life areas. When it affects your relationships, your health, your ability to make money, I'm sure there's another one, your life areas, then it's a problem. And so if you've been able to manage it without it impacting your life areas, that you can't hold a job, you're not holding on to relationships because it's getting your way, then you may seek help. You may need some medication. And ADHD medication is so effective in helping and kind of managing that. And you may have to go through 3 or 4 to find one that works for you, because medications work sometimes for some people. Some medications work sometimes for some people. And I have so many people that has just changed their life. And at the conference, how I usually end the conference, my statements is like, there's 3 stages of late adult ADHD and in getting medicated. And I've talked to a friend of mine who, last year, who said, "Oh my God, Rick, I'm in my mid 40s. I went and got diagnosed. I'm on medication. The last 2 weeks have been the most productive 2 weeks of my life since I've been medicated. I can focus. I'm not as anxious. I'm able to get things done. I don't worry about things. I don't feel like everything's overwhelmed. But I'm sad because, like, what would I have been if I would have done this 20 years ago? How good would I have been?" And I said, "You're in stage 2 of the 3 stages of adult ADHD and medication. Stage 1 is anger. It's like, why didn't anyone tell me this? Why didn't my teacher, my family, my partner, anything tell me?" And then stage 2 is, oh my gosh, what could I have been if now that I'm diagnosed and I'm medicated? How good would it be? And then 3 is acceptance, where this is the first stage of my rest of my life. Now I have it, and nothing can stop me now. And so, yeah, people talk about other things, THC, Adderall's obviously a medication for it, but you're looking for things that are, that's why people are addicted to coffee. Meditation I saw earlier. I'm a yoga teacher. That kind of helps, and it's kind of figure out what worked for you to kind of keep you centered. And so, and the reason why we're seeing more people is now we're identifying, and it's also, as you kind of alluded to, the stigma is gone. Like when I was younger, no one said, it's like, "Oh, he's autistic, it's okay, don't bother him." And now I'm like, I proudly say it. No one would ever say that before. "Oh, they're ADHD. Everyone's a little ADHD." It's like, no, I'm very proud of that, because I have these gifts that allow me to do these things that are unique, and I've learned to accommodate them to be successful in it. And so so it's a rainbow of things, and it presents differently for everybody. So there's no one right answer for everybody.
Rick, I love that. I'm gonna try and bring it towards a close. Yash asked a question that I think is really interesting. For those who listen to this podcast regularly, I had Asaf Kiran, who's the CISO at Qualtrics, on last, and he talked about being really important that he shared his mental health journey, and he'd had PTSD from his time at the IDF. With his co-workers, and started to talk about how it's important to share these things. And Yash asked what our views are on speaking about mental health well-being with your team as a leader. Now, I'm an advocate. I'm not a great talker, but I'm trying to get better because I think this is important. What do you think? So I think obviously there's a difference between mental health and between people's positions on the spectrum. What do you advise here? How do you help? Firstly, how do you talk about, do you combine talking about kind of neurodiversity along with mental health challenges and issues, depression, anxiety, stress, all that kind of stuff? Do you think it's separate from it? How do you do that?
Absolutely. And so I've even done it for in my own organization. Like our global CISO had me do the whole security team, which is about 500 people. And then I did the whole IT team, which is like 5,000 people. And then the corporation had me do all 75,000 people, to just socialize this and normalize it. Right. And the most common thing when I do presentations, in person or online, is people say, "I feel like you're talking about me." It was like, yes, you are seen, and you're welcome, and welcome to this club. And the more that we can normalize it, so we don't feel embarrassed about it, and that these things are also not things that are character traits, right? Short-term memory is one of the executive functions, and you may, like forget things very quickly, and that's why you interrupt a lot. Right, is because it's like, "Oh, he's saying this thing and it reminds me, I gotta say this thing." It's not because you're rude. It's not because you're disrespectful. It's not because you don't care about the person. It's like you want to say this thing and you're going to forget if you don't say it now. And just even saying that, you'll now give grace to people who interrupt you. People who are chronically late have poor time management. And there's studies that show that the clock in your head is not working, and what 5 minutes is 10 minutes to you or 2 minutes to you. And so you're chronically late. It's not because you're rude. It's not because you're disrespectful. It's not because you're flaky. It's not because you don't care. It's because the clock in your head doesn't work. And unless you accommodate it with timers and other things or notices, I'm going to give you grace for that. And so if we all kind of understand that it's not a personal thing, and then it's just my brain works differently, and how do I accommodate for it, right? And so yes, absolutely socializing it. And even like I have a whole discussion about interviewing, right? I mean, it's a whole other podcast in itself, right? And so the the thing about being able to socialize and say, this is okay. You are who you are. I just want to, and you may get there in different ways. One of the podcasts I did for Rsnake Show was talking a lot about trauma. You mentioned someone had PTSD. Adults with ADHD have PTSD from their childhood and from their teen years and from bullying and from being told over and over again, why can't you sit still? Why don't you this thing? Why aren't you normal? Why are you focused so much on this? Why don't you get, and there's like I call little T trauma or big T trauma, right? There's a lot of little T trauma that builds up and is just as bad. And so we got to reconcile this. And so that's why talking about it and socializing it helps. Absolutely, as a people leader, say, I acknowledge this and I'm open to helping accommodate for you.
The one thing I've started to think about as I've talked to a lot of people about this is to Yash's comment, I share, you share, I like. And I like the concept you're talking about, Rick, about normalizing it and making it a conversational topic. I think also emphasizing sometimes. I think I myself have also led pen testing teams and identified lots of people who are at various points in the spectrum who had superpowers because of it. They literally couldn't see defeat. They couldn't find a way to not break, to not find a way. And I think sometimes we don't do enough of that, where it's not just normalizing and saying, okay, this is how we are, this is what this is what that is, this is who we are. It's actually celebrating and emphasizing that people's differences and people's diversity can often be the reason that they've succeeded. I think that's more than just normalizing, right? I think that's an interesting point. Rick, I could go for ages, but I've got to close. I will probably get you back on to talk about different topics some point in the future. I have a tradition in this podcast that we pass the guest with a question from a previous guest, which they have no idea what's coming next or what they're going to be asked. Your question comes from our most recent guest, and his question, going back to security entirely, was, what's the hardest security trade-off you've ever made?
The hardest security
trade-off. When have you ever have to trade security or trade something out or something else for security?
Yeah. So no, that's a good question. And it's kind of like it's the wrong question to ask, though, because that's where governance comes in, right? Technical people don't make business decisions. And I many times as a CISO or as a management consultant or a virtual CISO could say, hey, I wouldn't do this, but it's your business and you can choose to have, to accept this risk, because, I present risks to them and likelihoods and impacts, and they can accept it, mitigate it, or transfer it. And so if so I would say that, I could go into a long story about when I was running ethical hacking teams, and we did a big online bank, funds transfer application that, we found this huge flaw in, and we went up to like the headquarters of this bank in Wall Street and was in this, mahogany conference room with all these executives. And we say, well, what is the risk to this? And I'm like, well, anyone could take any amount of money. And so they went around the room and said, hey, Josh, how much would you take? And he's like, 25 million. It's like, how much would you take, Betsy? It's like, 30 million. And so they went around. It's like, all right, so I'm talking like 25 to 35 million with someone who had the opportunity. That's my risk that I'm dealing with. I accept that, go ahead and put it out. And I'm like, and at the time, this was in 2000, literally 25 years ago. And my younger self with less impulse control was just like not being able to manage my impulse control. It was like, no, that's silly. You got to do this. You got to fix it, blah, 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 blah. And so, but that was the right answer. Like 10 years later in my adulthood, I'm like, my brain was fully formed. I'm like, yes, that was the right answer. And that's why I kind of use that as an example. And also I want to reference, because I see you put my my LinkedIn in there, but I have, if you want to see me do a full presentation on this, the RSA conference, US RSA conference YouTube channel, my presentation from last year is up there. If you just look for my name, the RSA YouTube channel from 2024. It's public. You can go watch it. And we talk about all I go into a lot of detail and have really great graphics that my niece made for me on that.
Thank you, Rick. It's been an absolute pleasure. Everyone should engage with you. Find your LinkedIn, find your RSA, find your podcast, and learn more. I think it's a topic that you know a lot about. You certainly sparked my interest and have led me down a path for the last few months that has taken me to whole new places in myself and in my social and in my family group. So I appreciate your time, no end. Thank you very much for joining us. Like I said, we will have you back at some point soon, I'm sure, to talk on a connected topic. So I appreciate your time. To everyone else who's listening, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your questions. Rick and I are both around somewhere, somehow virtually to speak to us in the future. Ask any questions you might have. We are real. to the question that the person is asking. I make mistakes. You can hear me interrupting and stuttering all
You can
the time.
you can see the back of my head. That proves I'm not AI because there's no you can't see the back of your head.
Oh, is that the
you're
one?
AI.
Right, okay. I'll do the same.
So yeah.
Thank you very much for listening. We'll speak to you all soon. Take care of yourselves. Be safe and embrace what's different in all of us. Thanks. Bye-bye.